Welcome everyone to another episode of To The Point with Greg and Grant. This is the podcast that gets to the point, stays on point, and makes a point. And we are focused on the aerospace and defense industry, as you guys already know. And with me is my partner in crime, Grant Triffo. Grant, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, absolutely. How you guys doing?
All right. Well, today will be part two of our conversation with Dan Lowney, where he shares his advice for entering into the aerospace and defense industry and touches upon how different learning in college and learning on the job can be. So I think you'll find that very interesting. But enough of that. Let's get to the point right now with Dan Lowney coming up now. What would you recommend to someone that is now interested in the aerospace and defense industry in today's world? What would you recommend to somebody, say, coming out of college with an aerospace degree or a type of engineering degree or technical degree or any of those type of degrees that want to get into it? What would you say to them?
Right. Today it's very different. People coming out of college often don't think about spending 10 years in a row working in one discipline or even one company. As I mentioned before, when I came out of college, there were veterans that had worked from the beginning of the space program, which we late 50s, late 70s. Yeah. They stayed there. There were pensions, right? After 25, 30 years. That's no longer the case. So when someone is experiencing this right out of college into industry situation, they need to think about what it would take to gain the experience and the capability and the skills to really contribute in the aerospace field. And I'm talking mainly hardware, not so much software. Mm-hmm. That you need to stick with it to become credible. I know people that would come out with a doctorate in physics or engineering, and they expect, okay, I'm on the job, and they find out that there are many other people there that not only have that credential, but they've actually done this for 15, 20 years. These individuals become discouraged. They say, well, I've done my work and I'm here now. It's not the case. It took me I'd say maybe 15 years to really feel comfortable in my situation in this industry.
Do you think today they need to go back for more schooling? Are you recommending that?
No, I don't think that there is school like.
It's more on the job training.
System engineering in aerospace. It's not something that you learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know of any programs out there.
Right.
It's on-the-job training.
Yeah.
So the challenge is for someone just entering the industry, well, I want to stay here.
Okay.
And really that's the only way that I'm going to gain the credibility and the capability to be a solid contributor, to become a principal engineer kind of thing. I don't know the answer to that. It's very difficult. I thought about it much. And I think that has led to problems in terms of industrial base acquiring the new talent to continue what's being done. The joke had been at a lot of the contractors that there's hardly anyone remaining with any capability. It's an exaggeration.
Do you see truth to that?
Yeah. I actually was sponsored for about a year and a half to study industrial base issues, and by visiting maybe 100 contractors that they knew that I had dealt with.
Yeah.
And given the advance, let's say the government said, well, tell them everything. Okay, this is a government-only thing, and they shared their concerns about, for example, talent. The universities are not funded to the extent that they can keep graduate students working in fields that would prepare them to transition into these areas. Many other issues other than that, but that was one of many issues having to do with the industrial base concern in the United States for aerospace technology. So yeah, I've thought about that quite a bit.
Interesting.
Now, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a pretty big believer in pushing STEM education, is that right?
Of course.
Yeah. I was kind of curious because there are a lot of different approaches to getting younger folks interested in STEM-related careers. Do you have any thoughts, insights that you could share with us in terms of like new ideas how to get the younger generation interested in going down that path?
May surprise you, but I don't. I think for those that are inclined, that they ought to be encouraged to work or at early ages into the science, the math.
Sure.
The technology part, I don't know. I believe they're doing more of that in some of these STEM schools.
Yeah.
I just encourage it. I don't have any specific recommendations on how to motivate
Sure.
either the schools or the students to go into that. But clearly, there's a gap between the jobs out there and the capabilities of the people to fulfill those jobs.
Right.
Gap in terms of supply demand, or gap in terms of talent, or both?
There are many jobs in the aerospace business, and I already described
Yes.
how I think it's difficult to
Yeah.
recruit people
Mm-hmm.
and have them begin to contribute. But there are fewer students that are studying physics. Many in other areas of engineering, but not specifically aerospace engineering. If you could go into Silicon Valley and work in those fields, and you could jump around from one company to the other every other year, why would you consider going to a Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, where you're just a very small fish for a long time working in a massive program? I think that's the gap that I'm talking about. I think the gap exists more generally.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There are more people with non-technical degrees coming out of college that couldn't really get into the companies we're talking about in the technology area.
All right, Dan, so a question for you would be in the realm of project management. I know you've been involved in that role for a number of years in your career. How did you get trained up in project management, and what were some of the biggest things that you had to overcome as you executed in that role?
As my career evolved, I was given more responsibility working with customers in defining programs, defining statement of work for contractors, reviewing bids and proposals, and then executing the program, perhaps in lieu of the customer working with the contractors. I'd be behind a firewall as a trusted agent. So it became more important for me to get into the project programmatics, make sure these contractors are on schedule, not so much the financial, but achieving objectives. We use tools like, I think it was Microsoft Project, the schedule, earned
Sure,
values,
yeah.
another concept used.
Yeah.
As far as training, not so much. They brought a guy out from Stanford to teach a 5-day seminar on project management, and we got a couple books to go with that. And we learned the ins and outs, the formal, essential elements of project management. That helped me quite a bit. But it was mostly on the job training. You follow how other managers run the programs, good or bad, and learn from that. So I will consider it mainly on the job training. A lot of it is intuitive, how to run a project. It's like running a project at home.
Right.
Right?
Sure.
You try to keep off that critical path. Right?
So Dan, another question for you would be, what do you think makes a big aerospace program successful?
Every program that I worked, big program, we're talking billions of dollars, was successful. I never worked on a program that was canceled. However,
Fantastic.
I have
That's a
been
nice thing to have on the resume.
I have been on red teams as an outside consultant to the government to review other large programs. And I'm talking about tier one would be the prime contractors
Yeah.
that would build the constellations, ground stations, etc. I can think of maybe 4 programs that I was in some way involved, a red team review. There are many takeaways. These are programs that after years would billions behind budget and years behind schedule. Often contractors are offering more than they could deliver. And I could see sometimes where they were offering something that looked attractive. They could usurp or replace an incumbent contractor that knew what they were doing and had been doing this. By the way, one program I could mention is NPOS, which was a joint program sponsored by the Air Force, the Department of Commerce, NOAA,
Mm-hmm.
and NASA. They were trying to do so much on that program. If you're familiar with it,
Yeah.
it had 4 years of 4 years of proposal work before they awarded the contract. And then after they did, you may know about this, the program didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
So I would call that over marketing, poor planning, overreach, trying to do too much. That would be one lesson.
When you say over marketing, just is that over promising in your eyes?
I'm talking about, no, I'm not talking about INPOs, but other programs
Other
in general
programs,
that
yeah.
have basically sold more than they could deliver. And we're talking about high technology where anything could torpedo the program. It could be one of many subsystems, or we're talking about a satellite system, a platform that had never been proven before, or subsystems or higher technology that had not matured, but made it very attractive to the decision makers in Congress and in the agencies that, oh, this is the greatest thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the planning, poor planning. I think right now staffing is becoming more of a problem where, as we talked about before, you may not have the veteran expertise.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We've had a couple of generations of people in the space program, and now we're at the point where commercial is taking over a lot of that, and you have fewer people going into these, I would call them the NTM, National Technical Means programs, because they'd be stuck there for life, right?
Mm-hmm.
People like to jump around from one company to the other. The industrial base issue that we talked about is part of it as well. You don't have as many suppliers, subcontractors, tier 2, tier 3 subs to provide all of the needed technology. Okay? There are fewer choices out there to provide the high technology needed for government systems that are very much different from the commercial and civil industry.
So if I could pull on that string a little bit here, when you say you think commercial is taking over, can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh, if we talk about remote sensing, I can recall when the first imaging satellites were approved to, I think it was 1 meter, Lockheed in conjunction with Eastman Kodak. The government permitted that kind of remote sensing system to be manufactured and deployed prior to that point. And of course, now you have, with Digital Globe and a host of other international entities, a lot of opportunities, I would say, for people, even in remote sensing, that take away from the what I call the NTM systems, the government systems. Okay.
That makes sense.
Dan, given all of your previous experience, because you've worked on a lot of programs, you've seen quite a lot in the industry, would you ever consider going into like a consulting business?
Right now, I am a limited partnership, so I have registered with the government, so I'm able to apply for jobs.
Oh, excellent.
I haven't done that. I like being retired. But I have essentially done 10 years of consulting as I worked at Lockheed Martin and then Vancor. I don't know what it is now, Perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I was essentially working behind a firewall as a consultant or advisor to the government, as I think we've discussed already.
Sure.
And I like that a lot. That pertained to the high technology, not the system engineering aspect of it. And that probably was the most enjoyable part of the engineering for me, because I would work with many, many different contractors who were developing high tech, and I would advise the government, this is what we need to do, and I'll manage that program. I'll write the specifications, define the technology to that extent. And that's something that I could possibly do in the future.
That's excellent.
The reason I don't is that most of the customers want me to be in Washington.
Gotcha.
And
Makes
I
sense.
spend enough time down there. But I could see doing that. It's the part that I miss, the
Sure.
consulting.
So
Rather
kinda-
than the doing, you're consulting and you're learning quite a bit by working with the leading edge developers of the semiconductors, the sensor technology. We did a lot of interesting things that I'd like to keep up on.
Excellent. So that partnership of yours kind of keeps that door open.
Yeah, it's a limited
Yeah.
partnership, registered with the acquisition or the FAR with the government. It would
Terrific.
be easy to do. So that I've had offers, but we like living up here
Uh-huh.
in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
All right, Dan. And what we like to do as we wrap up our episodes of To the Point is, since we have the phrase that we live by of get to the point, stay on point, and make a point, I would like to know, what point would you like to make to the audience today? It could be highlighting anything that we talked about, or even something that we haven't talked about. But if you had just to get one concept or advice, suggestion out to the audience, what would that be?
Given that we've been talking about topics revolving around the aerospace industry and my career, I would suggest that anybody interested in working in the aerospace industry or remote sensing consider the fact that it does take years to be comfortable working in this industry, particularly if you're working the hardware aspects or the system aspects as opposed to software. To be patient and learn. Try to find a mentor. Find a chief engineer that's willing and able to help you to learn. Sometimes it's very difficult to find people that are willing to share.
Yeah.
Back when I started, there were a lot of people defensive about their job. Right?
Uh-huh.
There were many layoffs after the Apollo program. People were not that willing to help a kid right out of college
Yeah.
to assimilate in.
It's
So I would
competition.
recommend
It's interesting.
take advantage of the training that I mentioned, specific training, seminars, short courses. There are many at the colleges like UCLA, MIT. Go for like a 5-day course tailored specifically to what you're working. I mentioned the mentoring, and also try to find a chief engineer that knows what he's doing and work your way into projects that you have a passion for and that you have the capability and that you want to work into that area. So
Excellent.
try to team with people that will help you.
That is interesting that you repeated a couple of things there that we've heard from previous guests. Mentoring, they all brought up, and continued education or training,
Mhm.
they all brought up as well. So, right, interesting that you also repeated those two things. So, thank you for sharing.
All right. Well, now is the time of the podcast, one of my favorite sections of asking the fun question. So, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, but from all of your background in hardware, you strike me as a gadget guy. Would you consider yourself a gadget guy?
You're killing me with this question.
Then it means it's a good question.
I have an iPhone. When I was a kid, I used to build kits. I was at Radio Shack and that sort of thing. In a way, being interested in the high tech in the industry, yes, we developed some of the original digital cameras in these behind the scenes programs back when so those are gadgets.
Oh, absolutely.
And
Wow.
I guess in a macro sense, in the space business, you're building large gadgets.
Yeah.
You're tinkering with, you're using empirical techniques to develop better and better.
Uh-huh.
So, yeah.
What is one of the most interesting gadgets that you own?
I have my original HP calculator that I used in college, and it's about that big.
And for those of you who can't
And
see,
it has
that's about a foot in size.
It has a little paper printer, a thermal paper printer.
Really?
With a lid that you can open up. And I keep that. I guess my wife asked, well, do we really need that? I said, yeah, we need that. I also have the first remote control from our first Sony television.
That's awesome.
Oh, wow.
And
I knew I was onto something.
And here's another one. I have in the basement on a rack my original 512 Macintosh.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You had to use a CD, floppy disk to boot up the system, pull the disk out, and then take an application like Excel. They didn't have it then. And it's
great.
an original, I think it was 256 or 512, so I keep that gadget. I don't think I have the operating system any longer. So those are 3 gadgets. There you go.
That's awesome.
All right, Dan, thank you very much for entertaining us with answering those questions, and thank you very much for all your time that you spent with us. We greatly appreciate it, and I'm willing to bet that some of the things that you talked about are really going to help folks out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, that wraps up part 2 of our interview with Dan Lowney. I hope that you enjoyed hearing about Dan's experiences and the insights he shared, including the importance of keeping talent, and folks shouldn't be surprised if it takes them years to truly feel comfortable in a job in the aerospace and defense industry. There's a lot to learn. Appreciate you joining us, and we look forward to having you back soon for another installment of To The Point.
The views expressed in this podcast are our own and not those of the companies we work for currently or previously, or of any person or organization affiliated or doing business with those companies.